You have to admit, I, Bruce Reynolds, am no ordinary thief. And the Great Train Robbery is no ordinary job. In fact, it's one of the greatest heists of all time.
It was almost like a myth. It was the holy grail of robberies.
Police describe the train robbery as audacious, outrageous, beyond belief.
The name's Tommy Butler. Scotland Yard's turned to me to solve one of the biggest thefts of all time.
It is very much like an Ocean's 11 scenario.
Certainly the biggest job that my father and his gang had done. The pressure was massive. We want these bastards. You get these people. We don't care what it takes.
The hunt is on as the Great Train Robbery culprits scatter across the globe.
Pulling off the greatest heist in history? No problem. Now, I just have to get away with it. They call me the Napoleon of crime. I suppose it's because I'm a natural leader of men. But I'm more than just a general. I'm an artist. In the Great Train Robbery, be remembered as my Mona Lisa, my Sistine Chapel. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Back in the early 60s, me and my regular group of criminal conspirators have been dabbling in small stuff. A bit of robbery, the old smash and grab. By 1962, it was time for the big time.
The London airport robbery was probably the first major job that involved a lot more planning, more people, was a lot riskier, and was certainly a lot more ostentatious than anything that they'd taken on before.
The London airport job was basically a wage snatch from the headquarters of British Overseas Airways at Comet House at Heathrow.
They dressed themselves up as what used to be called city gents, i.e. they had little furry bowler hats, furled umbrellas, black jackets, and they posed as businessmen who would not be in any way different from the dozens who milled round.
Nobody thought twice as 6 city gents marched into the building.
They hid themselves in the gents' toilets.
They could see, cutting across the airport, the security van with the money when it left the bank and had to do the rounds.
My lookout gave the signal.
As it came round, he alerted my dad in the car. The rest of the gang got in a lift, and when the doors opened, they jumped out onto the unsuspecting security guard. Then there was a bit of a melee and a fracas in the lobby, and basically grabbed the money.
It is very much like an Ocean's 11 scenario. 2 Jags appear out of nowhere. The money is loaded into the Jags. Armed robbers and the city gents jump into the 2 Jags and disappear. The beauty of all this is that it happens almost within seconds.
The take must have been disappointing. Just £62,000. But I had respect for the crew that pulled this off. I'm Tommy Butler, Detective Chief Superintendent at Scotland Yard. I knew this job was too big for the culprits to stay anonymous for long.
Scotland Yard had a very, very good criminal intelligence system.
There was a fine line between organised criminals and the police back in those days. They used to hang out together, they knew each other.
So they knew from the so-called underworld probably who the majority of people were at Comet House with masks and bowler hats and brollies. But, you know, it was just, how do you prove it? That was always the Achilles heel.
I don't drink with thieves. But it was clear as day. Bruce Reynolds was involved in the airport heist. His face would haunt my dreams. I became fixated, consumed, obsessed.
Tommy Butler was well known and well feared within the British underworld, I suppose, because he was incorruptible and he was incredibly dogged. You know, he was like one of those old Wild West Rangers who never lets go until he's got his man.
He had an excellent record, as they would say at Scotland Yard, as a thief catcher. He was, I think, quite an intelligent guy, an able guy, but he just literally worked longer hours than everybody else. Tommy Butler was a confirmed bachelor who lived with his mum. Arguably, he was married, but he was married to the Metropolitan Police.
He was fanatically devoted to the job. He did nothing else. He wasn't your typical sort of Sweeney copper who was out drinking with the faces and having a high old time. He's very, very dedicated and quite puritanical in some respects.
They have a name for me. One Day Tommy.
One Day Tommy was one of a number of sort of nicknames that Butler was given, and it was alleged that it took him one day from being given a case to collaring the person responsible.
It's going to take a lot more than 24 hours for One Day Tommy to bring me in.
At the time of the London airport heist, 31-year-old Reynolds was a member of London's criminal elite. He knew it, other villains knew it, and we knew it. We just hadn't been able to pin anything major on him. Yet.
That's because I was good at what I did. I was a quick study. I had worked hard at becoming the best thief I could.
My father came from a working-class background. He grew up in the war, and like a lot of kids at the time, reading war magazines and seeing German fighters come crashing down. He had a real strong desire to kind of be a major character in a boy's adventure type story. One of the loves of his life was cycling, and so he got a job in a shop where they made hand-built bikes. And there he met a guy called Cobby, who was a bit of a tearaway. He showed my dad, you know, how you could kind of take the money out of cigarette machines. It all started off very, very small. He got nicked a couple of times and went to Borstal, which is like an underage prison. Far from being a deterrent, prison is actually just like going to a university.
If you didn't know how to break into a house successfully before you went to Borstal, you certainly would by the time you left.
Reynolds came out of prison with an advanced criminal education.
Bruce Reynolds, right from the word go, he was a very ambitious and arguably a very intelligent individual, and very quickly he got into higher case crimes.
He was looking for excitement, and he found it in crime, and he was very good at it.
Every now and then he'd get arrested for this or that, and he'd go into prison and he'd meet someone else that could lead him up the next rung of the ladder. And this kind of process kept going on until he had his own firm.
He calls it a firm. I call it a gang. The other main players are just as dangerous. Charlie Wilson, a grocer turned bookie turned thief. And Buster Edwards, a boxer who got his start selling meat on the black market after the war.
We started to diversify. Stole expensive cars, jewelry, turned over a couple of armoured vans, dealt in dodgy antiques.
I think Reynolds' reputation at Scotland Yard was a growing one. They knew that he masqueraded as an antique dealer. They knew he was a man who lived the high life. They knew he was a criminal. The name kept coming up, but they could never really quite get a handle on what he was really up to. He became a very successful centre of stage figure in a London crime.
He was very different to the other gangs coming up in London, which you'd be looking at the Richardsons or the Crays, who were much more violent. They didn't have the style of Bruce.
Tall, spectacles, very dapper, very well dressed, like a Michael Caine sort of character, or Michael Caine playing a young Cockney villain. He had a taste for the finer things of life, and with his ill-gotten gains, he used to go for stays in the Ritz. He drove a fantastic car, had lots of beautiful women.
One of his earlier crime sprees, if you like, was he used to steal top cars in London, and then he and people like Charlie or Buster, they'd all drive him down to the south of France and rob the villas there. He said it was very simple. You'd go to the right bars and the right hotels, and you'd soon learn who was going where for a party, and so you knew which villa would be empty, and they'd go and rob it.
If he was to have modelled himself on any kind of one character, I would say it would probably have been Cary Grant in the film To Catch a Thief. In fact, my dad even had his suits made at the same place as Cary Grant.
I was more than a fashion icon, and a damn good thief. I was a family man. In 1961, I married Frances, and our son Nick was born the following year.
My mum and dad really loved each other, and I think I was pretty much spoilt to a certain degree. You know, they both doted on me, and I was very lucky.
The airport job was groundbreaking in many ways because it was a well-organised, brazen robbery.
The London airport job was a perfect stepping stone.
The airport job was crucial to Bruce Reynolds' reputation. He organised it. It showed that he had sufficient criminal cunning. He was someone who could organise a lucrative crime and get away with it.
And I think it was that suddenly gave my dad the idea of realising, is like, hold on a minute, the sky's the limit here.
I wanted to find the biggest target there is and get away with it again.
In the 60s, unbeknown to the general public, an awful lot of money was shipped around the country by Royal Mail in what they would call high-value package cars.
The Royal Mail train from Glasgow to London was one of a number of post office trains. As the train moved from Glasgow to London, it would pick up deposits of money through high-value package sacks on the way.
A plum target. Blokes I knew said these trains carry serious cash. $500,000, maybe more. But staging a robbery on a moving express train? Who's mad enough to try something like that?
This idea of robbing the Glasgow to Euston mail train had been circulating in the underworld for years. It was almost like a myth. It was the holy grail of robberies.
First, you'd have to stop an express train travelling at 80 miles an hour. Second, board the train, deal with the driver and guards, and uncouple the high-value package car without alerting dozens of postal workers. Unload the loot and get away before the coppers are called.
People had thought it was too dangerous, too difficult to execute.
I like dangerous. I like difficult. But that's just me. How could I resist the holy grail of robberies?
At Scotland Yard, we knew Bruce Reynolds was the man behind the London airport robbery. But we couldn't prove a damn thing. All we could do was wait for his next job.
Little did the coppers know, I was well on my way to pulling off my next heist. Something even bigger and bolder. And I found the perfect job. Robbing the Royal Mail Express.
A lawyer's clerk who knew a lot of criminals called Brian Field got a tip about this train and the fact that it would be full of millions of pounds worth of currency.
Its timing was significant, that they'd been informed that most money was likely to be after what is known as the August bank holiday in England.
Field didn't know exactly how much money was on the train, but he knew it was in the millions, and he knew it wasn't properly guarded.
The security, as Bruce Reynolds found out, was almost non-existent. This was the absolute flabbergasting fact that they just couldn't understand when they got this information. No one ever in banking circles or police circles ever thought that once that money was handed over, there was ever going to be a problem. Nobody could conceive of how criminals would actually steal money from a moving train.
But Brian Field knows if anyone could conceive of such a plan, it's me.
He goes to Reynolds because he knows that Reynolds can find a gang capable of carrying off a crime of this nature. It's a question of finding the right people who could be trusted.
I start with men I know, men I've worked with. Charlie Wilson, Gordon Goody, Roy James, and Buster Edwards.
I think because of his charm and his confidence, he managed to make everyone else believe that was doable.
Now the hard part, working out the details.
This has got to happen in the countryside, where their movements will scarcely be noticed and they will cause a minimum of disruption.
They chose the place to stop the train by doing very, very detailed research with ordnance survey maps and then actually going out and scouting the countryside. They wanted an isolated area, and they also wanted an area that was very close to a bridge over a road, because they wanted to be able to quickly move it from the train to a lorry.
So they decide that Bridigo Bridge and the Sears Crossing in Buckinghamshire is the ideal point at which to carry out the robbery. It's close enough to London for the perpetrators to slip away and get back to their normal lives almost without being missed. It's near an army base, so if they're seen rumbling through the countryside in a big old van, dressed in what looks like commander uniforms, this really won't raise an eyebrow.
Sears Crossing is perfect. I have a tough, capable crew, men I can rely on. But there's one outstanding question.
They realise that the only way they can do this is by stopping the train. This is no easy matter.
My firm doesn't know how to pull this off, but we know someone who does.
Now, my dad was aware there was another gang called the South Coast Raiders. There was a guy that had the inside information that knew how to stop trains without triggering any alarms.
Roger Caldry and his firm, the South Coast Raiders, had put off a few jobs for a pittance. Unlike me, they didn't know about the high-value package cars. But they do know how to jerry-rig a signal box, so we can turn the light from green to red.
Caldry basically showed Reynolds how he did it. That's effectively putting a leather glove over the bulb inside the signal.
Then he powers the red light using a battery. When a train driver sees the signal turn red, he'll stop. It's that easy.
It's so simple, you know, a child could do it.
The final piece of the puzzle. A man to operate the train, in case the driver refused. My old prison pal, Ronnie Biggs, put us in touch with a train driver. That brings our gang to 16. That's a lot of shares. We hoped the payout was worth the risk.
The train would have left Glasgow around 6 o'clock that night and was picking stuff up around midnight. Actually, you're getting almost the full load of money on the train as it goes along.
The driver of the train was Jack Mills from Crewe in Cheshire. As he approached the dwarf signal, which was red, as he would have to do, according to regulations, he then stopped the train at the next signal.
It's not a scheduled stop.
But of course, he's quite correctly conditioned to do what he has to according to the book. And the book says, when you see a red signal, you don't question it, you stop.
When the train stopped at Sears Crossing, Mills said to the fireman, Whitby, go down onto the phones and find out how long this is going to be.
David Whitby scrambles down from the cab of the train and goes to a railway-sized signal box to see what's happening. As he tries to ring through and find out why the train's been halted, the robbers grab him and they roll him down the embankment. Jack Mills are beginning to think, right, okay, what's going on? Perhaps I'll get out and see what's going on.
This is when the rest of the gang then storm up the embankment and jump into the carriage.
They come at him on both sides and he tries to fight them off and push them out of the cabin. They grab hold of him, and at some point during this, he is coshed.
It's not supposed to be violent. The coshes and the bats are meant to threaten, not hurt anyone. But Jack Mills tries to defend his train. In the meantime, the other lads get to work, unhooking the locomotive and the high-value package car from the rest of the train.
The uncoupling of the train happens simultaneously to the cab being stormed.
And the reason for that is that the rest of the train was a moving post office. There were 77 post office sorters on the train.
You had the engine, you had the high-value package, and then you had a load of other carriages which were full of post office workers that were sorting through regular mail.
They needed to detach the prize, the money, from the 70 Royal Mail staff.
My team at the track was 16 strong. We could hardly compete with 77 postal workers.
If the post office sorters in that train had worked out what was going on and 77 of them had got onto the track, you just run. There's no hanging around. It would have been a bloodbath of the robbers.
The idea is we move the high-value package just up the track, away from prying eyes. We even bring our own man to drive. But he can't start the damn thing.
The guys in the cab, the robbers, are getting very, very, stressed out now. It's like, for God's sake, get the train going, get the train going. And the guy's saying, I can do it, I'm just waiting for the pressure to build up.
We're losing precious time. Any moment those mail sorters will work out something was wrong, and it will be all over.
Summer of '63. And Bruce Reynolds has graduated from petty theft to one of the most dramatic heists of all time. The Great Train Robbery, theft of millions of pounds from a Royal Mail Express.
We uncouple the high-value package car, stacked with millions of pounds from the rest of the train, take control of the engine and get our own driver in place. But he can't move the damn thing. My colleagues are no doubt cursing whoever is the real driver on the head. Now he's our best hope.
So they pulled the driver back in, and he seems to be okay. They've sat him in the thing and he says, right, drive the train.
And they force him to drive, even though he's severely injured. They force him to drive the short distance to the pickup point.
We need the train stopped at Brigadier Bridge because we have vehicles waiting there to load up the loot. There are a couple of guys aboard the high-value package car. I'd expect them to tuck in and keep quiet. To their credit, they realise what's gone on and barricade the doors. But eventually, they realise resistance is futile.
They were advised to lie down and not to put up any resistance. They were told by the robbers, just lie there quietly for 30 minutes. The robbers then divest the carriage of its valuables, forming a human chain from the outside of the train up the embankment.
There was 120 bags, large bags, to be taken in with the money.
Now, unbeknown to them, of course, all the workers are happily sorting through all their mail until one of them thinks, like, it's a bit unusual. We seem to have stopped here for quite a while, I'll just have a look, see what's going on, and so he's obviously opened the window and poked his head out. There's no train.
As they're driving away from the scene of the crime, they think, hell, this is something really exciting. We've just carried off this amazing robbery. Put some music on. And it's Tony Bennett singing The Good Life.
Oh, the good life.
So there they are with this enormous haul, 41 million in today's money, driving through the back roads of Buckinghamshire with The Good Life playing loud.
I thought we were golden. Just by the weight and size of those bags, I was thinking we had at least 1 million. Maybe 2. This was big. This was bigger than big. It was the good life, all right.
They get back at the farm around dawn is breaking.
We're listening to police radio because we know those mail workers will find their way to a trackside phone eventually. It doesn't take long.
And there's a wonderful quote that goes through on the police radio saying, you'll never guess what's happened. They've only stolen a train.
No matter. They won't be able to find us at the farm.
Leatherslade Farm was another stroke of genius of Bruce Reynolds. If you look at maps, it's in the middle of nowhere. It almost just sits in a field off the road from either side. It can't be overlooked and can't be seen.
The plan is to divvy up the load and then go to obliterate all traces.
It was agreed that everybody got the same amount. So they wanted to count the money and do the split at the farm. It may sound strange to people, but there was no hierarchy in a robbery like this.
Everybody had played an equal part. Everybody was equally liable to end up in jail. So they'd all stuck their necks out. They'd all taken this collective risk.
And by all accounts, one of the first things that happens once it's been counted is everybody's invited in to come and look at it.
It's a sight both beautiful and terrifying.
A room stacked from floor to ceiling with money. And, that must have been a mind-blowing situation to have been in.
They have got millions.
2.6 million pounds.
Which in today's terms would be 42 million pounds if you were translating that into dollars, $60 million. An amazing sum.
They were buzzing. It was the high was more infectious than any drug they could ever take. And as part of that, they sat down and actually played Monopoly with real cash that they'd just stolen off that train.
But the fun and games won't last for long. The local coppers get to the train an hour and a half after the robbery has ended.
They know a train has been stopped, they know something has happened, but, nobody really quite understands actually what's gone on.
Until they talk to the chaps on the high-value package car.
Futrell, who was the guy running CID in Buckinghamshire, decided to do this 30-mile search based on the giveaway clue, as he saw it, where the post office workers were told, don't move for 30 minutes.
Detective Superintendent Futrell realizes the robber's hideout is likely within a 30-minute drive of the crime scene. It's a clever deduction. But Futrell makes the mistake of broadcasting his intentions.
It was announced to the press, and Futrell had actually mentioned in the same breath that they would be searching farms and outhouses and abandoned buildings.
Police are scouring the countryside for traces of the gang.
So immediately, the hairs stand up on the back of their neck. There's this search that's going to be taking place, and they're going to be targeting farms.
Time to get away.
Futrell and his local coppers work out that this is not the work of amateurs.
Buckinghamshire police started realising the sheer scale of it.
They very quickly realise that they're massively out their depth. It's almost certainly a gang from London.
Buckinghamshire police realised they would need to bring in as the flying squad.
The flying squad based in London, Scotland Yard, saw themselves as they were elite. It was just a matter of time before the big boys, if you like, came and took over from what they perceived as a sort of country bumpkin type kind of policeman.
I turn up at the scene, and I cannot believe the scale of this audacious crime.
This isn't just some small-time cowboy attempt to rob a train. This is a theft of £41 million from the Glasgow to Euston Express.
It was an affront to Her Majesty and a crime against the nation.
The people getting away with in such a daring robbery as that, it was just, as they said at the time, bigger than the Beatles. It's now every man for himself. What you do once you walk out the front door of Leatherslade Farm is up to you. Here's your money, best of luck.
We waltz out of there singing a good life, happy as clams. We thought our plan was foolproof and that not even the Scotland Yard boys would be able to track us down. But I was forgetting something. When a fortune's at stake, loyalty means nothing, and greed means everything.
The Great Train Robbery was one of the biggest in British history. And I knew damn well who was responsible. Mr. Bruce Reynolds, the mastermind behind the London airport heist.
My dad would have been the suspect from the moment the news broke they've stolen the train X amount of money. Instantly, Tommy Butler would have thought of a handful of people, and I can guarantee that my dad would have been one of them. The pressure was massive. The government were really leaning heavily on Flying Squad and said, we want these bastards. You get these people. We don't care what it takes.
I know I'm top of Tommy's suspect list, so I make myself scarce.
Well, after my dad left the farm, he got a lift, funnily enough. He hitchhiked a lift and he went into a nearby town where an associate of his was waiting. The first thing he had to do was to stash his money, and his plan was just to kind of lay low for a little bit and wait till the dust died down.
I knew the robbers would have gone to ground, so we needed to give the London underworld an incentive to come forward.
There was a massive reward on any information, £250,000, which was unheard of at that time. You could buy a house for £3,000.
All kinds of people start coming forward, naming names. One informant in particular comes up with the goods.
Very early on, an informer had passed a list to the police. It had most of the names on there.
It's almost a perfect list of who was there.
We're left with the same problem as with the London airport job.
There was absolutely no proof whatsoever. There was no fingerprints, no evidence or anything.
We have to find the hideout. We follow every lead.
A herdsman had seen the vehicles outside and notified the authorities immediately. I think this is the place.
Neighbours were seeing, a plume of smoke and all this kind of thing.
It takes a few days and there are hundreds of so-called sightings. But this one pays off.
2 policemen trudge up the lane and climb through the window and find mail sacks. They go down to the cellar. They can see money labels. It's a goldmine of evidence right from the word go. You don't need to be Sherlock Holmes to work out that this is the place where the Great Train Robbers were hiding. It's advertised. It's everywhere.
The consequence of leaving in a hurry, they didn't make such a good job of destroying the evidence.
The robbers themselves do the best they can in the hours before leaving to scrub down surfaces and all the rest of it. But obviously the thing about fingerprints is they're invisible.
The fingerprint experts found certain palm prints here, a fingerprint there on a bowl put out for the cat's milk, on a Monopoly set, on a banister.
Usually with fingerprints, you have to then find a match for them. But in this case, these fingerprints belong to convicted criminals that Butler knew very well. So they had both the names of the suspects and the evidence.
Buckinghamshire Police this morning issued photographs and a list of the equipment that they found in the farm behind me, which was the train robbers' hideout.
The press is going wild, and the robbers are running scared. Some of the gang even start dumping the money.
They found Brian Field's money deserted in the woods. The public went crazy thinking if they go out, they're going to find money. It was like a treasure hunt. Everybody in the weekends were going all over the country. Some money was discovered in a phone box. Some money was found in a caravan.
Within days of taking over the case, we have half the suspects in custody.
Within a week, about 8 members of the gang have been seized from their usual haunts because they haven't hidden away carefully enough or they've been betrayed by their associates.
We pick up Charlie Wilson, Ronnie Biggs, Brian Field, Roger Caudry, a host of others. But not Bruce Reynolds.
I go into hiding, and I stay on the move. Everything goes smoothly, till a couple of small-time associates decided to cash me in.
A couple of criminals had decided to burgle Reynolds' flat when he was out and hopefully find some of his, train robbery stash there. Reynolds had a first floor flat. Someone had put a ladder up against the window. A neighbour had rung the police and informed them that there was a suspected burglary occurring at this address. So 2 police officers were deputed to go round to the flat, knock on the door and find out what was going on. Reynolds thinks very quickly. He sends his wife to the front door. The wife, comes across all embarrassed, says, you've caught me out, officer. My lover's in the next room. My husband's away for a few days. They go into the bedroom. There's Reynolds, hiding his embarrassment and all the rest of it.
I think we can play along with the story, saying I'm just visiting with this lady while her husband is away. And they buy it.
So the police then sort of make their excuses, apologise for sort of busting in at an embarrassing moment, and it's only when they get back to Croydon Police Station that they see the guy that they were staring at 10 minutes before up on the wanted poster. And when Butler hears about it, they get a very hard time from him.
Bloody fools. They ruin a perfect opportunity to get the men I've been after for years. But in the meantime, we have the rest of the robbers to deal with.
The government of the day wanted a trial and they wanted it moving, and they'd already got about 12 people locked up.
The evidence in inverted commas that was put before the jury, which was circumstantial, was fingerprint evidence. The assumption, of course, is that if you were at the farm, you were on the track. I think the truth of the matter, and this is a bit of a controversial statement, if that case was heard today, nobody would have been convicted.
I admit, fingerprint evidence from the farm doesn't prove they robbed the train. But it doesn't hinder our case, partly because the British establishment is so bloody furious.
The politicians and the aristocracy were outraged by the Great Train Robbery because it was so brazen. It was like the robbers were sneering at the ruling classes and saying, we can get anything we want.
They wanted to make an example out of the train robbers.
The judge actually went so far as to say this was an act of war against the state.
The government of the day felt it had to send out a very strong signal that criminality was not acceptable. There's also the fact that Jack Mills, who was attacked during the course of the robbery, wasn't killed but never really recovered from his injuries.
One after the other, they all got 30 years.
It shocked the world, it's fair to say. It shocked Britain.
It shocks me too. I believe in justice, but 30 years is more than most men get for murder these days. And I know the threat of a 30-year sentence will only drive Bruce Reynolds, the mastermind, further underground. With the trials over and Reynolds on the lam, it's like my superiors just give up. In fact, they're pressing me to retire.
Over 55, you have to retire from the Met. You're an old man. And he actually asked to have his retirement age postponed so he could continue to hunt down the train robbers.
Tommy Butler never gave up. Knowing Reynolds was very fond of the south of France, he would sit on a beach with a pair of binoculars, searching the beach to see if he could see Reynolds.
Tommy Butler, the loner, the guy that his police colleagues didn't completely understand, was obsessed with this case. And as far as he was concerned, the Great Train Robbery was not fully solved until he got Reynolds back.
But I had no intention of going back.
Through his contacts, he arranges for a completely new identity, passport and so forth.
And after 7 months of living in hiding in various secret addresses throughout London, he took a private plane and flew to Ostend and then subsequently made his way to Mexico.
The police were supposed to be keeping a close eye on Reynolds' family after he'd gone missing. And yet, somehow, his wife and child managed to travel to Mexico and stay there.
It was just sort of like one big extended kind of holiday, really.
While Bruce Reynolds is on the run, he leads the high life, or his idea of the good life. He lives in Mexico. He hangs around with racing drivers and bullfighters. As far as he's concerned, he's living the dream. He and his family stay in beautiful hotels. He drives a wonderful car. He has the best of everything.
And so far, he's got the best of me. But the good life can't last forever. Reynolds will slip up, and when he does, I'll be ready.
While I'm enjoying my ill-gotten gains from the greatest train robbery in history, Chief Superintendent Tommy Butler has made it his personal mission to track me down at any cost. And now he's got added incentive. 2 of my fellow robbers break out of jail, putting the spotlight back on me.
I think what gave Butler a new lease of life in a very perverse way was the fact that Charlie Wilson and Ronnie Biggs escape from prison.
Wilson went over the wall at 3:30 this morning. They may have used a rope ladder, or they may have used ladders and scaffolding stolen from the builder's yard behind me here down the Canal Tope.
Ronnie hightails it to Australia. Charlie ends up in Canada.
Then, out of the blue, a single telephone call blows Wilson's cover.
Basically, he's tracked down and apprehended through a phone call made by his wife to her relatives back in England.
Information comes into Tommy Butler that that Wilson is holed up using a false name and identity in Canada.
So I pack my handcuffs and get on a plane. If I can't catch Reynolds, at least I can catch his right-hand man, Charlie Wilson.
It's a very simple arrest. He's there with his wife and family, and Butler arrives in the morning, no doubt with a load of Canadian police, and says, "This is it, Charlie."
Story began at Rigaud, 30 miles out of Montreal. This is the spot where Wilson was captured. Chief Superintendent Butler and the Canadian Mounted Police were taking no chances.
We fly Charlie Wilson back to the UK to face the music. And we pick up the trail to Bruce Reynolds.
By the search that was conducted at Wilson's property in Canada, documents that were found there led Butler and his team to believe Wilson had been in contact with Reynolds. Reynolds had visited him in Canada.
Something in that house tips off Tommy Butler that I'd been to see Charlie, and that I was back in the UK.
We'd been on the run for about 5.5 years, nearly 6 years. The money was running low, so he came back to England to look for another job.
Reynolds does not have enough money to maintain this high life forever. And sure enough, at some point, he returns to England broke and looking for his criminal associates so he can do the next job. This is when Tommy Butler realises that he's back in town.
Word spread out pretty quick, and the reward was very, very, very big, and it was obviously hard to stop tongues from wagging.
5 years have gone by since the Great Train Robbery, and we're closing in on Bruce Reynolds at long last.
People have seen him, people have heard that he's back. They then intensify tracking on Reynolds' known associates and hope that through those people, at least one of those will make contact with Reynolds. And that's exactly what happens.
One morning, doorbell rang and my dad shouted out, you know, "Nick, will you go get that?" And I ran down the stairs and thinking it might be a neighbour or the milkman or something, and I opened the door and in burst loads of policemen, you know, and somehow in the melee I got wedged between them and got pulled up the stairs. I suddenly found myself in my bedroom on my own, not knowing what was going on. I looked out of the window and there was dozens and dozens of police and photographers outside my window. And then my dad came out with Tommy Butler. "Hello, Bruce, you know, it's been a long time." You know, my dad said to Tommy, he said, "Yeah, you know, c'est la vie." They came into my room and my dad just, you know, said, "Really, you know, terribly sorry, son, but Daddy's been a naughty boy and he's got to go away for a while."
It was just after 6 o'clock this morning that police surrounded this semi-detached house, Cap Martin, number 19. They were led by Detective Chief Superintendent Tommy Butler of Scotland Yard.
There was a grudging admiration, I think, between my dad for Tommy. I mean, he was a legend anyway, Tom, in the business. And I suppose by that time, my dad was too.
How do you feel this morning, Superintendent Butler?
He was my dad's nemesis and vice versa, and I think, and for both of them, the story kind of ended, you know, once he'd caught my dad.
Reynolds pleads guilty. We catch him red-handed with ketchup. His prints were on a bottle of the stuff that we'd found back at Leatherslade Farm.
My dad didn't like tomato ketchup, never did. Why he would have been touching a sauce bottle, I have no idea.
There have been claims down the years that some of the evidence was planted in order to bring about those prosecutions of the Great Train Robbery gang. We'll never know the truth as to whether evidence was planted.
Reynolds is convicted on some of the Leatherslade Farm evidence, but he also agrees to plead guilty in return for a 25-year sentence.
Butler had put a deal to him. "Look, if you don't plead guilty, I'm going to be after your wife."
So my dad settled for that, really, and that's when he turned around to my dad and said, "Well, you know what, Bruce, you'd have made a really good cop." And my dad turned around to him and said, "You know what, Tommy, you'd have made a really good thief."
I meant what I said. He was the best at his job, just like I was the best at mine. No hard feelings, Tommy.
Any copper worth his salt would be proud to bring down a man like Bruce Reynolds. And I am.
It was a wonderful kind of swan song to the end of his career, and this was his life's work. This was his crowning glory, his crowning achievement.
He has the ultimate accolade, really, of being the man who caught Bruce Reynolds. So he's the copper's copper. He did the work, and he remains one of the most respected men in the flying squad.
The Great Train Robbery was the pivotal crime of the last century in the entire world. It's the one we know most about, it's the one we hear about, and it's the one that broke all the records. Bruce Reynolds served a very lengthy sentence, but he was never, ever really said a bitter word about what happened to him. He used to joke about where all the money disappeared to, but ultimately he was a very smooth, eloquent guy, and he was like that till his dying day.
He was more content that he'd made his mark in the sand. He'd made a name for himself in history. He'd done what he achieved to do, despite the price.